you choose this film to talk about?
I think there's something very powerful and primal about the films that move us. Movies aren't made to be viewed intellectually. They're made to be experienced emotionally. I was 13 years old when I got my first VHS copy of Thelma Louise. I watched it every night the summer of 1993.
What's he look like? Well, you're either crazy or you're on drugs. Well, I'm not on drugs, but I might be crazy!
It's not only a landmark film that is just as culturally relevant today as it was 32 years ago when it was released, but equally important, it also happens to be my personal favorite movie of all time. So I'm very excited to be talking about Thelma and Louise with you today. Let's dive into the movie. Thelma and Louise is the story of two best friends who set out for a weekend getaway and end up accidental fugitives. It premiered at Cannes Film Festival in 1991 and was released theatrically a few days later on May 24th. It was nominated for 6 Oscars, but only Callie Khouri won for Best Original Screenplay.
Callie Khouri for Thelma and Louise.
And it wasn't a major blockbuster, but it certainly wasn't a flop either. It grossed about 3 times its budget, over $45 million, which equates to about $100 million today.
Thelma and Louise is full of visual homages, but flipping the script and exploring a feminist perspective by having female leads. What do you see influencing it?
It was dubbed at the time of release as a feminist road movie, which is interesting. You know, road movies are a classic American genre. They're all about getting in your car and heading out into the wide open spaces, encountering danger, but finding out who you are. But this type of journey had been exclusively depicted in movies as a masculine pursuit. Thelma, played by Geena Davis, is an oppressed housewife, too scared to ask permission from her narcissistic husband to go on a weekend trip with her best friend, Louise. Louise, played by Susan Sarandon, is a diner waitress whose need for control is apparent immediately in her tidy hair and immaculate home. The convertible top is down, but we get no sense that Louise plans to let her hair down.
No,
right?
she's got her scarf on.
She's got her scarf on. I can't imagine that a single hair is going to be blown out of place. They will utterly transform over the course of the journey, internally and physically. So they head out for their weekend getaway, but pretty soon Thelma, who is determined to have some fun, convinces Louise to stop at a roadside honky-tonk so they can get their vacation started. Immediately when they arrive, they encounter this sweaty, smooth talker named Harlan, who buys Thelma drinks and spins her dizzy on the crowded dance floor. Louise loses track of her friend and then finds her in the parking lot where Harlan is about to rape her. It's hard to watch, but it's a pivotal scene because it's the inciting incident. The inciting incident is the scene in a movie that sets the story in motion. In this scene, Louise's actions irrevocably alter their course for the rest of the movie.
Absolutely.
Louise is both powerful and loses control. She saves her friend from this violent encounter, but then Thelma gets away, right? They could have driven off at that point.
When a woman's crying like that, she isn't having any fun.
But Louise pulls the trigger. Not in an act of self-defense. Doesn't even really feel like a choice. It's an act of instinct. And you get this feeling that she may have experienced something similar. This isn't just a film about good girls being naughty for the weekend, right? The stakes are high. Now someone's dead. This moment was really divisive. A lot of executives had a problem with the killing of Harlan, but we have to keep in mind the historical context. So the film opened at a time when the cultural image of feminism in America was shifting, when second wave feminism was being criticized for being out of touch, and feminists were really being branded as man-hating hags.
That's harsh.
For Gloria Steinem, a founder of the modern feminist movement, recently dubbed a feminazi by one conservative here. The revolution's on course, but the threat real. on everything from maternity leave to abortion rights to equal opportunity. The conservative right wing is challenging, she says, the changes of the past 30 years.
The label of feminist, it puts women off. How do you overcome that?
The problem is that the culture out there tries to make it into a bad word.
Toxic feminism was a term. There was this idea of this adversarial relationship between men and women. So this is kind of the world in which it was released. It was originally pitched as Easy Rider meets 9 to 5, which is a funny comparison, right? It doesn't really give you a sense of this movie, but there were no real comps at the time. Originally, Callie Khouri wanted to direct. It would have been her first time as a director, but with the controversial material and 2 female leads, it became evident quite quickly that a powerful male director would be needed to get a green light. Ridley Scott, who had done, at this point, Blade Runner and Alien, came on as a producer and eventually hired himself as a director. Now, in 1991, very few studios had experience marketing a movie built around 2 female leads. Thankfully, MGM Passé decided to risk the stigma of putting 2 women on a movie poster and marketed the movie not as a feminist road movie, but as a female buddy movie. The marketing strategy was based on a belief that the only way people would understand it is if they see it.
The cinematography is clearly impressive. In fact, it was nominated for an Academy Award. So let's talk a little bit about the visual look of the film.
This is grounded in this classic American genre, the road movie, and it really highlights Americana. As we travel west, we see the hues and the landscapes kind of turn this umber or orangey color, which is beautifully contrasted by that robin's egg blue color of the Thunderbird. But it's all about wide, sweeping landscapes, big blue sky, this idea of freedom.
And plenty of dust.
Plenty of dust, exactly.
I don't admire the hairdressers
I know.
in that film.
So Thelma and Louise decide not to go to the authorities after Louise shoots Harlan and instead head to Mexico.
What do you think Mexico represents in this film?
Freedom. Freedom. The movie is about Thelma and Louise deciding their own fate. So they're the protagonists, and the actions they take have to lead them to freedom, autonomy, liberation. For the most part, the male characters act as obstacles to that freedom.
Even as a female-driven tale, the male co-stars certainly play an important role, especially Harvey Keitel, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, he's a real advocate for them. And when the heat gets turned up, he's the one saying, I don't want anybody getting hurt. Christopher McDonald, who plays Thelma's husband, Daryl, is just so deliciously awful.
What a cad.
He's so funny. Michael Madsen is just the coolest. Brad Pitt, this was a star-making role for him.
Yes. Do you think Brad Pitt's character named JD is kind of a subtle reference to James Dean?
I love that idea. I don't know the background. I think that that's a great theory. Louise contacts Jimmy, her non-committal musician boyfriend, played by Michael Madsen, and asks him to wire her life savings to her.
Big step.
Big step. They continue heading west, and along the way, they come across this hot young hitchhiker named JD, played by Brad Pitt, to whom Thelma takes a liking. They arrive at a motel, and Jimmy surprises Louise by delivering the money in person. But in another room, Thelma and JD share a playful, passionate all-nighter. I also love the kind of gender role reversal that we see with a shirtless Brad Pitt as sex symbol. Is sort of the object of a female gaze. Thelma's afterglow comes to a screeching halt when she realizes that JD has stolen the cash that Jimmy brought Louise, her life savings. Louise falls apart, and for the first time in the movie, the newly emboldened Thelma takes charge and enacts a plan to get the money they need.
Gentlemen, this is a robbery. Now, if nobody loses their head, nobody will lose their head.
Jesus Christ.
It effectively then narrows their choices.
Absolutely.
Because now Louise and Thelma both have a reason that they can't really go back to their normal lives, even if they had chosen to do so.
Absolutely, it raises the stakes, and they're now wanted for first-degree murder and armed robbery, so they've added an offense. This is Thelma's point of no return. A point of no return is an element in screenplay structure which refers to the moment where a character can't go back. Callie Khouri said, and I quote, "As a female moviegoer, I just got fed up with the passive role of women. They were never driving the story because they were never driving the car." It's not just about power and empowerment. It's about allowing women to have a full range of emotional expression. The film asks, how angry are women allowed to be? How free are women allowed to be? Thelma and Louise are finally cornered just hundreds of yards from the edge of the Grand Canyon. They're surrounded by police and there's no road left before them. They have a conversation and they come to a mutual agreement to keep going.
Okay, then listen. Let's not get caught.
What are you talking about?
Let's keep going.
Sealed with a kiss, this beautiful sort of tender moment of love and connection. Thelma and Louise drive off a cliff because that's the only way they can be free and be in charge of their own fate. It's their final choice and, you know, arguably the ultimate act of liberation given their choices. Callie Khouri said she didn't want audiences to see the women crash and burn. She wanted them to see them fly, which I think is so beautiful. It's hard to imagine standing ovations in theaters at the end of a movie where your two protagonists drive off a cliff.
Yeah.
And yet that was the response. It was so cathartic for women who had been on this journey with Thelma and Louise, and I believe, because it's been my experience, have had a little transformation as well. You know, Susan Sarandon said that after Thelma and Louise, they predicted there would be so many films starring women. Many people thought that Hollywood would be changed forever and that we were entering a new era of gender equality on screen. But it didn't happen, at least not immediately. As Sarandon said, real change won't happen until it's profitable. That said, there has been progress made. In 2004, Geena Davis founded the Geena Davis Institute on Gender in Media, an organization whose aim is to mitigate unconscious bias in entertainment and to increase representation of women and other marginalized groups. Of course, the Bechdel test also emerged to measure representation of women in movies.
Does Thelma and Louise pass the Bechdel test?
With flying colors, with flying colors. Here's the criteria. The movie has to have at least two women in it who talk to each other about something other than a man. You would be surprised how few movies passed that test at the time that this emerged. A lot has changed in the last 32 years since Thelma and Louise was released. And I really think that this movie played a big role in shifting the perception of women, not only as compelling protagonists, but as powerful audiences.
What do you hope your students learn from the film and the screenplay?
Oh my gosh, I think there's so much to learn from this film. Structurally, the movie is perfect. It's a case study in itself for screenplay structure. Typically on the first day of classes, I ask my students to share their favorite movie of all time. And sometimes they react by saying, "How could I possibly choose one?" And sometimes they preface their answer with a little bit of bashfulness because the movie that they've chosen may not be considered an important film. I always encourage them to say it anyway because I think it's so important to identify what we love. Movies are meant to move us. When we make movies, we don't ask, do you think this will be lauded in the film history books as one of the greatest, most influential movies of all time? No. We ask, what do we want the audience to feel?
For all of you watching, keep the conversation going in the comments, and I'll see you next time.